So I'm going to start showing you how I teach using my iPad and stuff, so just some of the technology stuff, and then I'm going to start in on some of the voting theory. And so I use Notability a lot, and I'm going to just walk you guys through how I actually pull stuff up. So with Notability, I put everything I have in a Dropbox, and so I can access my Dropbox from Notability just by clicking on Import. And I can go to my Dropbox, ignore all of the folders, but one of these is for Gamecock Teaching Day. And here's a PDF I created that I'm importing. Oops, and of course, import. This will import this into my iPad. This is on Notability, and I can pull this up. And this is typically how I teach, is with Notability. We're doing voting theory, so I thought I'd show you this cartoon. I usually start every class with a cartoon, and this one has to do with gerrymandering. So they're in the little dot there, and they're trying to figure out if they're in the blue or the yellow. But here's voting in districts. And so if we zoom in, they're trying to figure out where they are, and they are actually in the orange. And so this is a cartoon on gerrymandering. Seeing how this is a voting theory class, I thought we should actually vote on something. And so I had a little bit of money left over from my grant last semester, and I begged Nina on Tuesday and begged and begged. Usually when we do the Gamecock Teaching Days, we do these things in person. There are refreshments afterwards. The college puts some money out for this, and now we're doing everything virtual. So I got Nina to agree. There's supposed to be 10 of us, and I got her to agree to a $500 honorarium that we can distribute however we would like. I'm getting a little worried. Christy's little sweat on her brow, but trust me, it's okay. And I figured since we're going to be talking about voting, we should decide how we're going to distribute this honorarium. So how do you guys want to distribute this honorarium?
An even split.
Even split. Okay, so I'm going to write this right here. Even split. Seems completely reasonable. So I've spent the last 2 days stressing about this and worrying about this, and I'm the one that begged her for the money, so I think I should get it all. That seems completely fair to me. And I know we only have 20 minutes. We could talk about this a little bit more, but let's just take these two options and let's just vote. And let me show you how I do the voting in the class. And a lot of you are familiar with this probably, but I use something called Mentimeter. So I'm going to show you the instructor part of Mentimeter, and then you'll see the student part as well. So this is just Mentimeter. I've already logged in. You create a free account, and I'm going to go to your presentations. And I actually created a couple different presentations. You can see I've done this before. This one I created is the Gamecock Teaching Day one, and it's my iPad, so I have to click twice. And this is what the blank presentation looks like. You can see where you can say your question right here. You can type in with the question. We're going to determine how to distribute the honorarium. And I think Christopher said the first option was even split. And I think that works out to $50 per person, because there's supposed to be 10 of us. I think we're waiting for a couple. And option 2, which is by far my favorite option, Scott gets it all, with a smiley face nonetheless. And as you see as I'm going, it's actually showing you what the slide looks like at the side. And so, and there are different types of things that Mentimeter will do. It does a word cloud if you're doing a discussion, so that's a lot of fun, where students can access this and just put in words or phrases and it creates a word cloud. But I use it just for voting. You can use this for quick formative assessments just to see where students are at, do a vote. You can use it like the clickers. So this would be a free way to access this. I'm doing a really simple one, so I'm just going to go ahead and start the presentation. And this is, you can have this already, and this is what the students see. And the best part of this is you can take any device. I'm going to do it on my phone. Please, all of you do this. Open up another window. Do whatever you want. I'm going to go, let me do this really quick before you guys do, though. I'm going to go to menti.com. It says at the top there's a number 7783064. I'll submit. So I can go ahead and I can close this voting. I think there's only 7 of us at this time, so this is everybody voting. And so what I do often is I will take a screenshot of this. I'm going to just really fast crop this a little bit. I'm going to save this to my photos. And what I can do then is I can switch between my apps, and I can go here and I can add from my photo library, and I can put this right into these notes. And there's the live vote that we did. What I'll do at the end for class when I'm teaching, what I actually do is I would upload this as a PDF to Blackboard or something. And so we have vote number 1, and I am going to declare the outcome is that I get it all. My vote is the only vote that counts. So I should get the entire honorarium. So what do you guys think?
Boo, that's unfair.
Unfair. Why unfair? What's unfair about it?
The majority should rule.
Hey, why should your vote count more than mine?
Why should my vote count more than yours? So the votes aren't counted equally? So it's unfair because the votes aren't counted equally?
You've imposed a dictatorial decision rule.
I did impose a dictatorial decision rule. The votes don't all count equally. And so this is one idea of, in air quotes, unfairness in elections. The votes don't all have the same weight. Okay, we're going to redo this vote. We're going to do the same thing. Option 1 is going to be the split, and option 2 is going to be Scott gets it. But this time, I can spell, I promise. I want to do the same thing, and this time I'm going to treat all votes fairly. So I'm going to go back to Mentimeter. I'm going to reset these results, and I'm going to run this presentation again. And so what I'd like you to all do is go ahead and vote again, and vote the same way that you did before, please. So same thing, I'm going to try to take a screenshot of this and crop it down. I can do this with pretty much anything, take a screenshot and pop it into the notes. I do this a lot with an online graphing application so that we can look at a graph of something in class and I can really quickly insert it into my notes. And I think they both look the same. And this time, I want to treat all of the votes equally. Okay, so I want to take care of Rhonda's idea that this was unfair. All the votes are going to be treated equally. Now, originally, I was thinking that I was going to do this really cool thing where I pretend to hand an envelope through the camera over to Rhonda. But I want you guys to understand, I gave this to Rhonda weeks and weeks ago. Can you show them the envelope, Rhonda? And do not open until this day. She signed the back. So will you go ahead and open that for us, Rhonda?
This is like magic.
The entire honorarium goes to Scott Dunn.
Yes! And all of the votes were treated equally. Every vote had the same weight. So this was fair, correct?
Because this was your decision?
All the votes were treated the same. So this would be another case. We call this imposed rule. And in this case, all of the votes were treated the same, but the two options were not treated the same. The outcome was already predetermined. So the two candidates in this case, Scott gets it all or the even split, are not treated the same. All the votes have the same weight of absolutely 0. There's no weight to them at all. So here's a case of, using Rhonda's word, unfair. The candidates are not treated fairly. And so this is another thing in elections that we try to get rid of. We could do this again, and we could take another vote over the same thing. I think you guys have the hang of Mentimeter. And so here, we could do the vote coming out the same thing, and I could say, okay, candidates will be treated the same. The votes will all have the same weight, but the person who gets the fewest votes wins. And again, I get the honorarium. So this is really cool because no matter how we do this, Nina's writing me a check. So I really like this sort of thing. And so people try to argue that maybe this isn't fair either. It doesn't make sense that you get more votes, but you end up losing. And so these are ideas of fairness in elections. And if you guys would bear with me for a minute, I'd like to formalize these three things. So when we talk about a voting system, there are three things that we just discussed that seem appropriate. Very formally, because we are mathematicians and we have to make this dry and very precise. So we would talk about anonymity. A two-candidate election is anonymous if the voters are treated equally. And that was the first case. And the way that we would quantify this is say, well, if any two voters were to switch their votes, the outcome of the election should not change. And I think Brett said that I was being a dictator in the first case, and I absolutely was. That case is not anonymous, because if you switched my vote with Rhonda's vote, that would switch the outcome of the election. The other one is neutrality. So that's if the candidates are treated equally. So in our second case, the candidates were not treated equally. This was an imposed rule. I gave Rhonda that envelope weeks ago. It was predetermined. But that means to quantify that, we need to get every voter to switch their votes, and then the outcome of the election should switch accordingly. And in that second case, we could have all switched our votes, and Rhonda still has the same envelope that still has the same decision, and I still get all the money. And the other one deals with probably what you guys would think of as minority rule. We don't want to have the winning candidate become the losing candidate by getting more votes. So if the person that's winning gets more votes and all of a sudden is no longer in the minority, they become the loser. I put a note here. All of these things are really reasonable and they're very desirable. And this seems to make sense for us. Normally in this class, we would spend 6 weeks looking at these and a few other properties. I don't want to put you guys through all of that, but I do want to look at one other property quickly. And for those of you that are experts on voting theory, pardon my hand waviness, but I would like to look at the Florida election of 2000. Do you guys remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It took a while. And the outcome of the Florida presidential election in 2000 was interesting because it just so happened that the way the Electoral College worked, that the winner of Florida would win the election. And this is how the votes stood. George W. Bush won, but not by much, 547 votes. And the question people always had was about this candidate here, Ralph Nader. What do you guys know about Ralph Nader?
He was a big consumer advocate. To the left, he was the third party candidate.
And he was to the left. A lot of people called him a spoiler candidate because the suggestion is that if Nader did not run, all or most of his votes would have went to Al Gore. So they call him a spoiler candidate. He really had no chance of winning Florida, let alone the presidential election, I don't think. But just the fact that he ran detracted from Al Gore. If you add those 97,000 to the votes that Gore got, it's probably a fair assessment to say that the voters of Florida prefer Al Gore over George Bush. But just the fact that Nader ran caused Gore to fall down in the rankings and Bush to win. And so Nader really was, as far as the rankings between Bush and Gore went, if people were asked just between those two, Nader should be irrelevant to this. But in the election, this irrelevant candidate caused Gore to lose to Bush, even though if Nader wasn't running, it would have changed the outcome and Gore would have won. And so after a lot of discussion and after a lot of weeks that we're not going to go through, we come to the conclusion that maybe this should be also a desirable thing in a voting system, is that irrelevant candidates should not change the placement of other candidates as far as society is concerned. We call this the independence of irrelevant alternatives. So the outcome between any two candidates should depend only on voters' preferences between those two candidates. So only when it's between Bush and Gore, it should only depend on how people feel about Bush and Gore, the voters, rather than Nader somehow affecting that, which is what happened in Florida. So we call this IIA, and this seems like another reasonable and desirable thing to have in a voting system. And so we've got just 4 things that we have talked about in the last half an hour that seem completely reasonable and desirable and nice things that a voting system should have. And here's the punchline. And I'm paraphrasing Arrow's theorem. This is from 1952. This makes me sad. Arrow was an economist, but he won a Nobel Prize for this. If you have an election with more than 2 candidates, it is impossible for a voting system to satisfy those 4 reasonable and desirable conditions. Please note, I said impossible here. This is the mathematic impossible. It's not, we haven't found a voting system yet. It isn't, maybe we can come up with one. It is not possible for a voting system to satisfy these things. And colloquially, the way I think about it is saying elections are in some way unfair no matter what you do. And that's Arrow's theorem. He won a Nobel Prize for this. And this is also how I sum it up. We spend about 6 weeks going through a lot of different things. We look at different properties, and Arrow's theorem says that we can't have fair voting. Just there, and by fair, I mean we can't satisfy all of those criteria. This is also a social justice course. And so the top map is showing counties that voted Republican versus counties that voted Democrat. It's from the most recent election. And that makes it look like blue is in the minority, but then people vote, not land. And this represents people. And these are different ways of representing the same type of data. Unfortunately, depending how you represent things, you can definitely skew how you look at things. So typically, this is how I teach. I actually have students come up to class, and I will give them the pencil. I have the alcohol wipes, so I wipe it off, and I will have students write on the iPad so that they can present to the whole class. At the end of the lesson, I can always export. So if I go up to this little export button, I can export this to Dropbox, and I can save it as a PDF. And so I would upload this to my Dropbox, and then I can post the completed PDF. And the PDF would include all of the stuff that I wrote. I highlighted all of the graphics, and then the students could access that from Blackboard. And that's what I wanted to talk about. That should be a little bit about voting theory to make you at least uncomfortable enough to understand that this is more complex than you think. And it's a little bit about how I teach with the technology and doing the virtual stuff, and maybe a little bit that we can have more discussions in mathematics rather than just do theorem, definition, example, and go on.